Hi, and welcome to the Indie Author Insider Podcast. My name is Candice. I'm your host today. And today I am actually with Chris Ruiz, and he is the author of The Wishing Well, which is a horror novel. And we're going to be asking him all things about his book. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast with us today. I sincerely appreciate you. Do you want to go ahead and get us started by telling us about what your book's about?
For sure, yeah. So again, I'm Chris, and I write primarily horror and spec fiction. I'm the author of The Wishing Well. This is a collection of loosely interconnected horror short stories that are focused on a bar called The Wishing Well, in which ill-fated wishes take place or are navigated anyway.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
it's a collection of short stories. So that means that it doesn't read from cover to cover as one story. You have multiple different stories in it, correct?
Yes. Yep. But they all so the nexus point here is a bar called The Wishing Well. And you
Okay.
have patrons who are driven by some kind of want or desperation or need who go into this bar and engage in this almost kind of ritualistic wish making, casting a coin into a wishing well and having this deep, dark desire of theirs met in sometimes brutal ways. But these are a mix of creature features, psychological horror. There are 9 stories in total. Yeah, so it is. There's a little bit of something for everyone in the under the horror umbrella, anyway.
Okay. So with it being 9 different short stories, does that mean you have 9 sets of characters within each story? Or like for each story, you have a set of characters for all 9 of them?
Yes. So the story has a different protagonist, and so if I were to bring up, say, the first 2 stories, the first one is called The Captive, and this is about a man who um, is a perpetrator of abuse, but he is someone who struggles with reactivity, with aggression, externalized aggression.
Mhm.
And he has this idea that he is trapped in his life. So there's the title, The Captive. He is trapped by his marriage. He's trapped by his family. He's trapped by this idea that he never got to be who he wanted to be or what he wanted in
Mhm.
life. And so the story is focused on him trying to free himself, and he does so in a way that reality kind of breaks around him a little bit. And then the second story, The Substitute, is the other side of the coin, so to speak. Here we have the main character who is a child who is the recipient of some undisclosed and ambiguous things that are being perpetrated against him by his
Mhm.
father. And so his wish is for happiness. And his story breaks down over time so that the reality around him shifts. The actual storytelling itself shifts as well. So probably the last third of the story breaks down into more of a almost like a child's fairy tale storytelling structure that uses rhyme structure in the end here. So it's actually about the last, I think, quarter of the book, or I'm sorry, the last quarter of that story. The substitute is what I used for the audition script for the audiobook. It seemed to really be a hit with the the 80 plus people who submitted their auditions.
Wow. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it was overwhelming and a very, very difficult choice. Exceptionally talented people, some very some very pricey people. I even had one of the voice actors from Love, Death, and Robots from the Netflix show put in a audition, but
Wow.
yeah, it was overwhelming, and I spent a lot of time listening and re-listening to people's auditions, listening by headphone and listening by car and off my phone, and all the ways that I listen to audiobooks. I wanted to give it a shot every different way just to see how different things sound, their cadence, their rhythm, the
Yeah.
the, the quality of their recording equipment, all these things.
That's amazing. So when you're listening to that, how does that feel? Like, I feel like that would be an out of body experience for me. Like, I wrote this and now people are reading it and they're wanting to read this. Like, how did that feel?
For sure. Yeah. So, gosh, the when I put the script up on ACX, which is Audible's, that's their audio production side of things, and I immediately started getting these auditions in. And the first time that I heard somebody reading that script, reading my work out loud, as a potential audiobook, gosh, I broke out in just the biggest smile. It was an incredible feeling, and one that started to become a little bit more daunting as more and more of the auditions came in, because I thought, "Oh gosh, now," as a writer, you're so used to being on the receiving end of rejections, right?
Right.
You're querying,
Yeah.
you're submitting things, um, to get published, but now I'm in the seat where I have to be the one making the choice and sending people messages saying, "Hey, loved your stuff, but it's gonna be a no for me now."
Yeah.
It was horrible.
I could
Yeah.
not imagine. I'm a supervisor where I work, and we do have to have the rejection conversation, usually when it comes to promotion. But you're right. I mean, it's not a fun conversation to have at all. Like, hey, I loved it, but I can't move forward with you. And you did tap into something, those books to get turned into an audiobook, it's expensive to do so. It is not a cheap feat where you just submit it and it costs, $100 to $200. Rumor has it, some of those books are $100 to $400 an hour of
Oh,
record
yeah.
time.
Yeah, the SAG-AFTRA rate. So the narrator that I went with, is a part of SAG-AFTRA. He's an actor, so I believe the minimum per finished hour rate, for a SAG-AFTRA narrator is, gosh, I think it's 350 or $400 a finished hour.
Oof.
So if you're looking at an 80,000 word novel, you're in the neighborhood of about, gosh, what, like 3 or 4 grand.
Yeah. That is a lot. That's definitely an investment. I will say,
Yes,
as someone who listens to audiobooks, as a reader, we often hear the, why are audiobooks so expensive? Why are books so expensive? Why is this so expensive? And why are indie author books more expensive than trad published books? And I think there's that misconception that everyone's treated fairly across the board and that things on the back end are a lot cheaper than what authors are making them out to be. And when you sit down and you actually talk to somebody who's going through the publishing journey, the dollars, I just feel like they just keep adding up. And at what point, are you able to make a profit when you're giving to everybody? You create this piece of work and then the Zon takes a significant amount of the profit. From what I hear, Ingram Spark also takes a significant amount of the profit. The audiobooks, in order to get it even produced, it's an investment. It's, into the thousands of dollars. So, how do you navigate that as an author? Is this something that you do primarily full time, or do you also work on the side in order to support the ability to be an author?
for sure. So, I have a bit of a unique situation. I spent, prior to moving, I just moved to Central Illinois here about 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years here in a few weeks. Before that, I was living, at my workplace, which was an adolescent psychiatric residential treatment facility.
Mhm.
I had a few jobs that I worked there. One of the jobs, was crisis response, which, required my living on site so that I could respond to crises in a matter of minutes. And so, as compensation for that role, I was, provided housing. And so, for several years, I had just been saving money during this time, which allowed me the opportunity during the move here to, invest into a writing career. It's something that I really wanted to do. So I was still working. It's been like the first time in my life that I haven't had a W-2, which just feels so odd. But just been doing some, landscaping and driving for Uber, and just picking up some odd things that I can do on the side to still make sure I'm getting the bills taken care of. But it's
Yeah.
allowed me to focus primarily on writing.
Yeah.
And writing, unfortunately, in the indie world, there is a significant financial burden. There doesn't have to be, but the quality is going to decline, unfortunately,
Yeah.
if you're not investing in the right ways.
Yes.
Everything from cover to cover is going to cost you something. The cover design, the interior formatting, unless you're able to do all these things on your own, and sometimes, as a debut author, as an indie author, um, you really have to be able to build trust with your readership, And
Definitely.
it's tough to do so if you're doing it all on your own. And some people, they look for those credits. They look to see if it's edited by someone. They look to see, I've got my wife illustrated this, and so
That's
she,
amazing.
yeah, which has been great. And I'm lucky to have her. She is a graphic designer, and an illustrator, and so I've been able to get some help from her on that. So I manage my budget. Gosh, I mean, I never met my budget goals.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, end up spending more than what you want, and
Right.
I know, at least for now, I'm probably never gonna see that money back,
Right.
right? So, and that's the reality of indie publishing. I cannot move into it with expectations that I'm gonna get, that I'm gonna stay in the black. So that's where I'm at now, and there's the post-publication dread of marketing, and that incurs its own expenses as well, right?
Yes.
And paying for ad placements or whatever it may be. But you're right. I mean, everybody's getting their cut. I have the book in Kindle Unlimited right now. The ebook, I believe I'm making 70% of the royalties on the ebooks that are sold. But as far as the physical prints, I mean, 60%, the audio is 40%.
Yeah.
I can't even set the price of the audiobook.
Mhm.
I'm in Audible right now at the 40% royalty rate required, a 7-year exclusivity period with
Oh, wow.
Audible. So it's exclusive to Audible for another 6.5 years.
Wow.
And I can't even set the price.
I have heard that with some things, and I think that just blows my mind because I'm like, if it's your product, how do you not have control over it? And I understand. I understand from, the contractual agreement side and things of that nature. But I know that one thing that indie authors have said in the past is try to get the book into the library and things of that nature. So with it being on Kindle Unlimited, I obviously know that your ebook necessarily can't go anywhere else, but your physical and hardcover can. Where are you? Are you anywhere else other than Amazon or the Zon, with your
Yes.
paperback and hardback? Okay.
Because I am on Ingram, the book is available to be ordered through any book distributor. So if you go into an indie bookstore or Barnes and Noble or whoever, they should be able to look it up by the title, by the ISBN, and they can order that
Okay.
way. Um,
Awesome.
there were some changes to Amazon's KDP, their Kindle Direct Publishing program, that does allow now for library access to the ebooks. Um,
Oh, wow.
and so that requires that your book be published onto draft to digital, or D2D. You might see people refer to it as that. And I did put the book on there so that the ebook could be downloadable through the library. Unfortunately, D2D made some changes as well, where now they will be charging authors who are not selling enough or getting enough interest through their platform. So they're charging you kind of this fee for hosting your work on there. So I unpublished this book from there because I wasn't getting enough, and you don't make enough off of the library rentals for the ebook anyway. But I do have the book is physically in my local library, and that's just been awesome to see.
Yeah.
I've gone to see it a couple of times on the shelves, but it has been checked out, which has been kind of bittersweet. Hey, I wanted to see it on the shelf and get a picture. Um, but it feels really cool that somebody's actually checked it out.
Yeah. So whenever we're talking about your book, we know it's a horror book, and as a romance reader and as someone who likes to read thriller, suspense, those are like my top 2 favorite genres. I feel like whenever you're on social media, it's a lot of romance books. So as a horror author, my first question is why did you write horror? Like what was your draw to that genre? And then the second question would be is how do you market in what feels like a predominantly romance genre network?
For sure. Yeah, so horror, how and why did I get into that?
Yeah.
Uh, Unfortunately, throughout childhood, I had been experiencing a lot of sleep paralysis episodes. I had terrible, just night terrors. I had a lot of bad dreams. And so I had, at one point in my life, started writing a lot of my dreams out. As a child, I think that's probably some of the first horror that I ever wrote would have been
Yeah.
the retelling of my dreams. I ended up just being more and more attracted to horror media, books. As a kid, Goosebumps and such, scary
Mhm.
stories to tell in the dark. I mean, everybody saw that in their school library as a kid, right? And
Yeah.
then The Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt, seeing, just the cackling corpse on TV and then just it, making light of it, making fun of it, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
comedy in horror, and I think because of that, it can work well for children. It can work well. It's very accessible, I think, for a lot of people. Horror at its core is about subverting expectations, and that's what a lot of comedy is too. And I think that's why the two work together so well is the subversion of those expectations and such. So, but back to me, writing the horror just stuck with me. I ended up falling in love with it as a kid, and I wrote a lot of just terrible stories throughout childhood and adolescence. Um, and it wasn't really until I don't think it was until I got into the army that I'd really gotten back into writing seriously. I always wrote for fun, and I always just kind of wrote silly stories and such. But um, I spent about a year in Iraq as a machine gunner, and when I got back, I had some experiences at the vet center where I had some of my treatment team had been discussing with me writing exercises, creative nonfiction, creative writing, and so I got more into that, and as I started reflecting on that in my experiences in writing, I thought, I think I might have some stories to tell, and I think I can tell them. I think I could tell them better in a fictitious manner than I ever could as nonfiction. It just to me, it never really felt right to put too much truth on paper. Anyway, from my experiences, it's easier. I should say it's easier to tell them in a fictitious way. So horror, yeah, horror is it's having a resurgence right now. A horror novel won the Pulitzer Prize recently. You're seeing all these awards for horror films lately. The box office comebacks for indie horror films or indie filmmakers in the horror field, outdoing what The Mandalorian and so, I mean, you look at the success that Obsession is having. People are hungry for horror right now, and I know that typically when life seems to be getting a little harder in general, maybe economically or politically or whatever, horror usually has these little upticks, but it's been on the rise right now. And when that pendulum swings, I think it's easier to find a little bit of that success. But you're right, as far as literature goes, the reader's market is, I mean, it's just romance dominates it. It's romantasy right now. I think is seeing a huge upswing, and and
Yep.
just a lot of romance in general. It's a big umbrella and it covers a lot of things. And you've seen a lot of horror romance as well is kind of popping out there. And it can be tough to try to market. My goodness, is marketing difficult. I personally despise it. I hate trying to sell myself. I feel like a door to door salesman.
Yep.
I I like to be a reader. I want to be a reader and I want to engage in reader spaces, but now as an author, I have to create a little bit of distance from reader spaces professionally, and how do I
Yeah.
manage that? So
Yeah.
it's tough. I wish I had a better answer for that, but I'm a newbie, so
Yeah.
that's where I'm at right now. I'm still learning all the marketing curves.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely correct in that. So I will say you're absolutely correct when it comes to horrors on the uptick because we have a group of influencers. We are very fortunate to have, into the thousands at this point. And one of the most common requests that we get is, "Hey, when will we have a horror arc? Do you have access to any arc reads that are horror related?" And so I've gone to Threads before and I'm like, "Hey, I need a horror author, please. I've got multiple requests coming in for horror." And it's fascinating to look at our thousands of ARC readers and influencers, and a lot of them are not prominently romance readers. They want sci-fi and true fantasy, not romantasy. They want true fantasy and horror and thriller, suspense. And so it's fun because when you go through my feed, 95% of it's romance, romantasy, romance thriller, and that kind of dabbles into something I was talking to about with another author is In the indie world, you get a lot more of the genre blending. I was going to ask you, has it been done yet with romance and horror yet? And you had already, you already kind of hit that topic. And with the genre blending, how do you feel as an author who writes in one space about the whole genre blending?
Yeah. So, like I brought up with comedy, I think horror and comedy work exceptionally well.
Mm.
I think that there is a lot of potential for others. People are hungry for sci-fi horror. Gosh, probably one of the biggest films I think in the horror community is more sci-fi horror. It's the thing. It's usually in
Mm.
everybody's top three films.
Huh.
You have, even in my book right now, I have a mix of psychological horror, demonic horror. There's some religious horror in there.
Mhm.
Just these different subgenres. For romance, gosh, I think it's just that people found that it was clicking.
Yeah.
There are so many romance readers right now, and I think maybe the reason why, gosh, what are they calling it? Horror romance and romantasy and these other
Mhm.
things. I think romance readers are hungry for change. They want something a little, maybe a little different, but they still want to stay in the romance scope. So people are jumping on that opportunity right now, and it seems to be working.
You also said something that triggered my mindset because I firmly believe in my soul that there will be a day where people want indie authors more than they want trad published authors. I feel like there's more exposure coming to the indie author community, really figuring out what indie authors are, what that entails, etc. And I feel like there's more and more support for that community because as someone who just converted this year to indie author reading, trad published books are so cookie cutter that you can pick up a book and almost guarantee you're going to know the plot lines. The characters will be different, the locations will be different. You might have a little bit something that is different than the other book, but for the most part, the bones are the same. But when you come into the indie author space, there's no rules, there's no regulations, there's nothing telling you that you have to stay in this little square. You guys can color way outside the lines. And I think as a reader, that's what draws me more toward an indie book compared to a trad published book is the fact that you don't have to stay in the lines if you don't want to. You can absolutely wreck every single rule out there. But you also mentioned something earlier. 87% of readers will buy a book based solely on their cover art. And when you're paying for everything out of your own pocket, not someone else's pocket, but your own pocket, that becomes very difficult to come up with that cost. And sometimes those cover arts will never sell your book because it's not attractive enough to the reader. Now, you have a very attractive cover. I would absolutely be like, oh, let me pick that up and let me read the back blurb 100%. But you do have a lot of cover art that is very difficult to see past. And typically, when you look at a piece of cover art that is not well done, the book inside can be exceptionally written, but your reader won't trust what's inside because of what's on the outside.
For
So
sure.
when you were going through your publishing journey, did you keep that in mind? And is that why you decided to make the investment that you did?
Yeah, unfortunately, you are absolutely right. Probably the two biggest, most important things that people are going to look at is you try to look at things as from a reader's perspective, or even just a consumer's perspective, right?
Mhm.
Does it have that initial visual appeal, and that's going to be the cover, and then does it have the appropriate social vetting, and that's going to be the reviews, right?
Mm.
So I'm I think that's still the same, just as it would be for any product. It's the same for books. When people jump onto Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever, they'll look at online, I should say. If you're going into a bookstore in person, you're a little bit more open to exploring things. But online, usually you're looking at that thumbnail, the cover, and then your eyes are drifting right on over to the reviews, which is right next to it, right? And
Yep.
you're looking to see, is it positively reviewed and does it have a lot of reviews, right? And that's a part of that trust you're talking about. If you see a poor cover, can you trust that the quality inside is not going to be reflected by how you determine that perceived quality of the cover is? And I'm going to bring up AI here because we talk about trust. and establishing trust in the indie community. And I think indie authors and indie publishing and small press publishing and even indie filmmaking, there's been a lot of work on the indie authors or indie producers and to establish trust in readership. And I think we were finally getting to that point. And now AI has come into the picture, and now we're seeing AI writing and
Yep.
AI covers. And even if the writing isn't AI, if people see an AI cover, they're going to have to make the assumption that AI was also used between the covers, and it is dissolving. It's decaying trust. We're in a period of distrust right now, and so it's becoming even harder, I think, for indie artists to get their brand established, to get anything moving because of AI. But yes, invest. I think now it's probably more important than ever to invest in things like this. I may have to my next book, which I'm hoping to have. I'd love to get into the ARC phase. Man, if I could get an ARC campaign by late fall, I was hoping to have a publication this year, but I think it's going to end up being pushed into 2027, unfortunately. But I had my water heater went out, and
Oh,
so I had to replace that out of pocket, and that's got to cut into the book budget. So
yep.
what do I do about moving things around to make sure that I have a good quality product that I can put out there?
Yeah.
That is constant thinking of how to reflect so much on the outside with so little to work with. I mean, all you have is the
Mhm.
typography and this initial appearance. How can I establish trust with
Yeah.
somebody as a blind buy? I came in. This is my debut. It's a collection of horror shorts, and I can't ensure trust in readers yet, right? I mean, that's the nature of debut in the indie world.
Right.
But yeah, that's where yeah, you're right. That's where you have to focus a lot of your money into right now. I think is the cover.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, the AI conversation is so controversial. You have people that are 100% against it. You have people that are 100% for it. And, it's hard as a creator whenever you have your own opinions and you want to say them, but then, you don't want to upset either party. So you move forward. I know you and I had a conversation offline about where I stand with AI. But you're right. As a reader, if I look at a cover and I see that your cover is made from I don't know if the inside wasn't done with AI. And I genuinely generally stay away from AI covers. Now, some of them I can't tell are AI, and I think that's where I struggle as a reader because I'm like, I think it might be AI, but I'm not sure. And how do I figure that out without putting it through AI myself, which I'm not
Mhm.
going to do. So, yeah, I think you're right. You've got to establish the trust. And there are a ton of authors that reach out to me about art campaigns because I PA for authors. And then I also have our influencer team. So then we send newsletter blasts to them every week. I get it from both ends. I have readers that say, are any of these authors AI generated as far as their work goes, their writing? And I have to answer to that for every single person.
Right.
Um, and so whenever I turn an author away for AI generated cover art, sometimes it's not very friendly. The conversation's not very friendly. And it's a hard conversation to have because it's, hey, I don't want to break the trust with my readers either, our influencer team by giving them something that's AI generated. And it's not something necessarily that I want to read myself. And they're hard conversations because it becomes very controversial. But at the end of the day, how can you trust the writing that's within the book if the whole cover is also AI itself? And I understand trying to save money. I understand that argument 100%. But that is where I would say if you don't have the money to invest into your cover art, respectfully, I think you should hold off for a little bit and wait until you have that or barter your services if you can, maybe barter something. If it's a genre that the graphic designer likes, maybe you offer them a free book or something to that capacity. Get creative with it, if you will. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a very touchy subject, very controversial, and there are a lot of feelings involved with the AI conversation. So thank you
For
for talking
sure.
about that.
And that's one of the reasons so my current work in progress, which it's currently titled in the mountains, the woods.
Mhm,
and I've hired an illustrator, who is doing an illustration for the cover, and then
mhm,
I'm going to have a designer actually do the cover design and everything too. But I have specifically asked for hand drawn uh, pen and ink style, kind of that etching. One, I wanted to reflect a little bit more of the kind of old survival classics.
yeah,
But two, also, I think the appearance of that hand drawn is going to be maybe a little bit better received now more than ever,
mhm,
because it's going to ensure that there is no external resources like AI that have been used
yeah,
for that.
yeah. Because 'Cause I've seen, like, with some cover artists, I mean, social media can be your best friend, but it can also be incredibly toxic,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've definitely seen people's careers get ruined over they've drawn, the entire thing themselves, but then they put it through AI to get the eye just right
Oh, yeah.
or, things like that, and then you lose all credibility at that point because even though it's your work, now you've thrown it through the AI generator. So the hand-drawn thing I think that's actually a really neat take, I like that. With your second book, is it also going to be a short story collection, or is this going to be a longer book?
Yeah, so this is going to be my debut novel. So The Wishing Well is my debut collection of horror shorts.
Okay.
I've had some horror short stories picked up in other anthologies, just small indie presses. Eldritch Cat Press published a short of mine last October.
Uh,
The next book is going to be a novel, and so it is one just the one story. It's focused on a gal and her a combat veteran and her dog who
mhm,
are being hunted by a group of men in the mountain wilderness, but are also being stalked by a presence in the woods. So.
ooh, okay.
Uh,
What has been the hardest part of the writing process? Let's go for this new debut novel. What's been the
okay.
hardest part of that writing process for that book?
So the hardest part, at least for now, prior to publication or finishing the manuscript, gosh, I have had, unfortunately, right now, some periods where I have been forced to take breaks away from the book. The storytelling here really requires a lot of my attention, and for me as a writer, I have to get my mind into the story, and it takes me a little bit of time sometimes. And I feel like I can get on a roll, and I'm really starting to produce something. And then here we are in spring and summer, and it's the time when we got to be out with our families. We're
Mhm.
going on vacations. So I did spend a couple of weeks in Singapore with my wife and my mother as we did a family trip. And then I
Amazing.
spent another week driving to and from Pittsburgh for StokerCon, which
Oh,
is
wow.
the Horror Writers Association convention. They get together to do the Stoker nominations for horror literature, and those have all been really awesome experiences, and I'm super grateful for them. But
Sure.
it's pulled me away from my writing, and it's difficult to get right back in. And so I got to take all this time to get back into the mindset and regain the voice that I'm trying to use. I've really been trying to go for a distinct, specific storytelling voice for this novel. I wanted to reflect a little bit more of the naturalism of like Jack London or of Jim Kilgard, of that kind of wilderness survival setting, and just the philosophical approach to writing and storytelling that was prominent in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so I wanted to reflect a little bit of that, but with modern storytelling, with a modern setting anyway.
So with the characters, I think that would be really difficult is, tapping into obviously you have to tap into a whole different that's not your everyday life. You don't get up every day and that's not what you're in the middle of doing. So tapping into each of the characters because you've kind of already elaborated a little bit that you have your as the book world would call it, the FMC, and then you have some main male characters, but your protagonist and the people that are after her how difficult is it for you, or is it easy for you to tap into their each individual character and speak to their characteristics, their personalities, their emotions? How easy or difficult is that for you?
For me, it's actually been a little bit easier because I have had a lot of personal experiences to draw from.
Okay.
For the individuals who are hunting this woman in the story that I am currently writing, they are the hyper masculine, the man's men, right? The beer drinking, hammer swinging, fire starting kind of men, right? And those are the men that I was surrounded by in the
Yeah.
infantry. I really stood out there. That just it wasn't my personality. It just really wasn't who I was, but I was able
Yeah.
to learn a lot from the experiences I had with these men, and then I'm able to draw from them in the experiences that I did have to create a more well-rounded and more in-depth character, I think, for these people. And so the main character, she is a combat vet who is struggling with ideations. Is one of the reasons that she's gone into the woods. The story
Mhm.
begins with a very short prologue in which she enters the mountain wilderness with the idea of not returning from the mountain
I know.
wilderness.
Yeah.
And so she when she goes in, she's struggling with depression. She's at her lowest low.
Mhm.
And she encounters an abandoned dog that appears to be kind of on death's door.
Mhm.
And she is obviously feeling responsible for the dog. She doesn't want to just leave it to
Yeah.
potentially die in the woods, and so she rescues it and carries it out of the woods, and then she's found her reason to live there. And so
Yeah.
they return to the woods a year later to celebrate life together, and that's where they encounter this group of individuals. Now, for her, I'm able to draw on a lot of personal experience with depression there, but beyond that, um, I I've had a lot of aspects of this story were drawn from feelings of impending doom that I had in childhood. I am the son of a Mexican immigrant, and I had a few experiences where we had law enforcement or
Mm.
immigration enforcement show up to our home in childhood.
Mm.
Uh, Seemingly with the threat therein of my brother and I being taken away from my mother's care or
Mm.
my mother being taken away from us. Um, she was a legal resident of the United States, but not a citizen. And so there were some struggles that we had there. And so I had an idea for this story that was going in a different direction previously, where the antagonists in the story were Border Patrol. And then I just had the story set on kind of on the back burner for years. And we've had some recent political shifts with the current administration and some shifts in the approach to immigration enforcement that has been very newsworthy over the past, plus year.
Mm.
And it kind of reinvigorated my motivation, remotivated me to come back to this story. And so I made a lot of changes. I think it's going to be a better story now. I'm really looking forward to the publication of this one, and I'm very hopeful for it. I'm putting a lot of my heart and a lot of my personal experiences into this.
Mm.
The antagonists they are all ICE agents, though they are not working specifically in uniform, so to speak. Right? This
Yeah.
is kind of a side situation that is going on. They will be hunting this woman for sport in the mountain wilderness.
Mm.
And then again, there will be another presence in the woods. It's always lingering, always there, and makes some appearances here and there.
Yeah. Well, I personally love the sound of this book. I have dabbled a little bit into horror because of indie authors. Now, beforehand, I had never really, I guess, maybe I had dabbled into it without really realizing what the horror genre was about. But I love that because it sounds like it's going to keep me interested as someone who has a criminal justice degree. That the whole chase thing absolutely fascinates me. But I did wanna ask you, as someone who reads predominantly romance and thriller/suspense, what do you feel like is or what do you know of as the difference between a thriller suspense to a horror genre? Like, where does the line get drawn between the 2 genres, and what separates them? For those of us that might not know what that line is.
For sure. I think a lot of thriller suspense focuses on a race against time. Usually there's something that is going on that's driving the plot to a need to act and need to act immediately lest there be some consequence. That's the thrill they're in. Those thriller suspense novels, because you are trying to keep the reader actively engaged in the story
Hmm.
pretty much from start to finish, they tend to be a little on the shorter side. I'm thinking, I don't typically read thriller suspense, but I'm assuming what, 60, 70,000 words is usually what we're looking at for something like that. You can only keep somebody in suspense for so long, right? Eventually the reader's gonna say, "Hey, let's get it moving.
Yeah,
Let's
about
let's get
300
this."
pages.
Yeah, for more, thriller or at least horror that's being told through, the structure of survival thriller, I think it is you're focused a little bit more on not just surviving, but what does it mean to survive? So, I think the thriller side is more, the act of surviving. The horror side is what are we surviving, and what does it actually mean to survive? And maybe from a little bit more of a literary perspective anyway, that's probably the case. And so
Yeah,
if I'm alive, am I really alive? What is life? What is death?
yeah.
So I think that's a lot of the difference.
So, like, before I really broke out into actual genres and realizing what genres are, I think the assumption comes with horror that if someone writes horror, then it has to be grotesque, a lot of gore. That's what I'm looking for. I think people really they relate gore to horror,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's necessarily always the case, is it?
Right. That is a subgenre of horror. I don't write gore for the sake of gore. I
Okay.
really don't even write gore, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Um, so splatterpunk and extreme horror are two of the subgenres that I think focus a lot more on shock value, or at least they're writing to try to get some type of reaction from the reader, to elicit a reaction of discomfort anyway. Um,
Yeah.
and for the horror, at least the horror that I'm writing, and I think a lot of horror, it's more focused on the exploration of themes of grief or depression, things that can be interpreted through something monstrous. These are
Mhm.
things that are not easy for people, even especially in like that Western mindset of death and the exploration of grief.
Right.
Um, it is, gosh, it's been a storytelling device for decades, centuries of doing the things that haunt us in real life, fictionalized as some type of beast or something that we could potentially either dominate or that it consumes us. And so, for horror, yeah, I'd say there is the people who don't consume horror. It is easy to look at it and think that it is oftentimes gore for the sake of gore. It's tough to overcome that perception.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's absolutely a misconception with that because I'm guilty of that, beforehand. That's exactly what I thought it was. If you told me you were a horror author, that meant there was gonna be a lot of blood, guts, knives, weapons, we'll call it weaponry, um, and organs that are just falling out of someone's body and maybe being consumed, and then branching out to the indie author world and being educated, I was like, "Oh, well, that breaks that misconception for me because now I know to actually look at the back blurb and see what that might entail." So I thank you for breaking that down because I have a genuine feeling that there are other people that struggle with that misconception that horror just means it's going to be the shock value. It's going to be disgusting. You're just not going to want to talk about, someone getting their organs cut out of their body, etc. And of course, there's a reader for that. There's a reader for everything. It's not my cup of tea, but
And
it's
there
definitely
are
some
some
people.
expectations that there's going to be some horrific things that occur in horror. I think it's a really great way to explore fear, though, and the things that make us feel fear or
Yeah.
to kind of feel human. We all seek it. That's why we enjoy roller coasters, and
Yep.
it's why we enjoy, the even as children, I don't know, Peekaboo or Jack in the Box or whatever.
Yeah.
These things that kinda give us that feeling of being alive and appreciating it. The second story, I'll bring that up again, The Substitute. All the stories are told in first person, but The Substitute is told from the perspective of a child, and
Okay.
and so I keep the first half of the story is a little bit more simplistically told, with a child's, vocabulary or a child's perception of the world. And as a kid, there's a lot of fear of the unknown and a lot of fear of strangers and such. And so this child, when he goes to school for the day after he has this experience and makes his wish, he finds that he has a substitute teacher instead of his usual teacher. And so I'm sure we all remember when we got the sub for the first time, maybe in first grade or second grade or something like that. it might feel, you still don't know who the person is. You're trying to get a feel for them, but there's a little bit of that stranger danger sense,
Yeah.
right? And the kid goes in there, and here we have the teacher who, her name is Mrs. Smiles, and she's, or that's how she introduces herself anyway. And so she's trying to get the kids to engage in this rhyming game with her so that they can try to keep happy in the classroom. And if they're not playing this game with her in the way that she is wanting them to, she punishes them by taking them to this closet at the back of the room. And she puts the kids into the closet, and the children, they don't come back out. And
Mhm.
so it's that fear of challenging authority, or feeling that lack of control in childhood, where you have an adult who's giving these commands and such. But the child in this story, he lost his mother like a year prior, and so, his wish was that everybody could be happy again. He wants everybody to be able to smile. He wants us, he wants to
Yeah.
be happy. But yeah, and so I reflect on those fears. It's, gosh, it's probably the weirdest story I think I ever wrote. And I don't use gore, but I do use spiders in that story. and
Oh,
and so, which again is another childhood fear that people have. I really want readers to know, people who don't typically read horror, that there is some really cool and fascinating stuff that's going on in the field of horror right now, and it's not focused on clowns dismembering victims and
yeah.
eating them into meat grinders and stuff. It's not all of that. There's some really
Right.
cool stuff that's going on in the field right now.
Absolutely. With your 9 short stories, which one was your favorite to write and which one was the hardest to write?
Oh, by far the hardest to write was called The Audio Files. I
Really?
rewrote that thing probably, gosh, at least a dozen times. I think I
Oh,
totally
wow.
deleted it and rewrote. I just kept thinking there was a story to tell. I had
Mhm.
my beta readers, and they enjoyed the story. I never felt that it was right. I never thought it was ready to get published, but I had so many people telling me, "You gotta publish it. I think it's there, it's ready." I've had some people say that it was their favorite story in the book. I still It still haunts me, this story, The Audio Files. It's about a group of soldiers who go out for a night on the town, and they come back to post. They come back to their base to an absolute nightmare, uh, with creatures I just refer to by the title as the audio files. But that was probably the most difficult for me to write. It was the longest story by far. Probably the most fun. Gosh, I think it might be the lake. So you got a group of friends who go to a remote lake in the mountains to do some boating, just some recreational boating, and they end up stranded on the surface of the lake. One of the friends dives into the water after something, and it was lost from the boat, from her person, without
Mhm.
spoiling anything anyway. But she jumps into the water and she doesn't resurface, and so now we have um, this group of friends who are on this boat, and they are unable to get to the shore. They're unable to really get into the water. They don't initially know what's going on. They just know that something is going on in the water, in which if they get into it, they're not going to get back out.
Yeah. That
But
sounds like it would be fun to write.
yeah, but the substitute is still probably the one I think I get the most discussion about. I actually had an email. I received an email a couple of weeks back from a UK audiobook listener. It was, I think, kind of my first. I don't know if I should call it fan mail or not, but it was the first email that I received from somebody that I thought I needed to print out. Um, to keep a physical copy of. And the guy was just saying, "Hey, I just finished listening to The Substitute, and I gotta say, like, it was awesome. I loved the rhyme structure of it. I loved all these things." And I replied to the email. I got it first thing in the morning. I was still a little tired, and I think maybe my reply might have been a little too horror writer and not enough just regular person, because I said, "Hey, you're reaching out to me has put a smile on my face like the monster in this story," and anyway, I never got a response from the guy after that, but, which, maybe I didn't need one, but still, it was incredible to get
Yeah.
feedback like that. I loved it. So if you're a reader thinking about reaching out to an author and just letting them know beyond just like a review or something, like if you wanna try to personally connect, I loved it. It made my day, man. I mean, I
Yeah.
still think about it obviously today, weeks later.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a total valid point because there's a book that I read, it's called Promising Justice, and it's a thriller, suspense, but it has, like, the CIA, FBI elements to it. And I read it, and I found out the author was an indie author, and I reached out to that author, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, I loved this book because I love crime scene stuff, I love FBI, CIA, like, all that stuff. That's why I have a degree in criminal justice, okay? And yeah, I mean, same thing. She was super giddy, and that as a reader, I was like, "Oh, you guys actually care that we like your book?" But I mean, naturally, you would think, obviously, but I think from the reader side, we don't even think about how our words would impact you guys to that level. You know, you spend so much time writing this book and rewriting and
And
editing and all this other stuff. So to hear from a reader that they love your book, you know, it's got to be an indescribable feeling. I can't imagine what it's like, but I would imagine it's indescribable.
for sure. And definitely a difference, I think, between because we talk about whether or not we feel like it's worth our time or if it's weird or something, it's maybe just not socially right to try to reach out and praise the author. But I think
Mhm.
there's a difference between making a pilgrimage to Stephen King's house in Maine and getting a picture in front of his house. The difference between that and reaching out to, a debut novelist or something and giving them a positive email
Yeah.
for sure. And it goes a long way. Or even just tag him, I guess, online and say, hey, I just got done reading this book or this story and it was incredible, or I love this X, Y, or Z or something. I guess just don't like tag an author if you're trashing the work, but
Right. Be respectful.
yeah.
Absolutely. So you've kind of given us some tidbits on, you know, what you would want a reader to know. But if you had one piece of advice for a reader, or if you wanted them to know whether it be about your book or not about your book, what is something that we haven't already discussed that you would want a reader to know?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm very passionate about this because I grew up as a reader and I want to take some time, I guess, to focus on the reader and the act of reading and not focus on me specifically. This isn't me trying to sell myself, but literacy rates, reading for pleasure, it's on the decline. And that is just so disheartening. We have so many great books right now, I think, that are going undiscovered or unread because our reader base maybe is dwindling a little bit. The readers who
Hmm.
are reading, they're doing great to an extent, and I'll come back to that. But I think the beyond just the attention span decay that we talk about, I don't think people are making reading a rewarding enough experience. And so I guess my question would be to readers, what are you doing to make it enjoyable? I honestly, I think if you could find one space in your house that was dedicated to reading, if you have enough of the space to make that happen, or just one type of way to make the environment a more rewarding, more relaxing experience, sit down with your pet and a book and, hot tea or whatever it is that makes you most comfortable. Have your phone set somewhere else, super important. And then take the time to read 15, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. Make it the most enjoyable, rewarding experience so that you start to associate the book with that pleasurable feeling, that relaxation. Do
Yeah.
not use your phone in that space because then you're just going to start associating scrolling rather than page turning with that relaxation, right? And that's
Right.
that's not what we want. But gosh, and then for the readers, um, these reading goals, some of them are so ridiculous, and the triple digit book marks they're trying to get these goals for a year, and people are talking about being in these reading funks. I see all the time some people who are trying to push through what they would consider a DNF anyway, that they did not finish the book, that they'd
Yeah.
rather just finish out something that's unenjoyable. Oh, let's be honest, that's all that's going to do is that's you're just doing yourself a disservice as a reader. Keep reading enjoyable and keep reading. That's that's what we got to do right now. And so that is my rant, I guess, about readership right now.
No, that's fair and valid. I mean, as from the reader space, you know, I am in a very fortunate position because I had surgery in December that didn't go well. And so
Mm.
it prolonged my time off from my job because I have a 9 to 5. I work a regular corporate America job and then I come home and I work for authors. And In the 6 months I was off of work, I was very fortunate to discover indie authors and discover what KU was, because I had no idea what KU was, and Kindle. I had heard of Kindle, but I had no idea what really it was. I don't have one yet. That's the next thing I need to get, I guess, but I have an iPad. I have ADHD. I'm technically ADHD, and I talk very fast. I think very fast. I move very fast, and I love to read. So at the beginning of the year, I was fortunate to where I was reading 3 physical books a day because I didn't have anything else to do. I was recovering from surgery. I couldn't just get up and go have anything. I was laying down. And I love to read, so I love to immerse myself. But as I discovered what KU was, and I discovered the accessibility option to where I can listen to the books as well, I have naturally consumed more books than the average person would. And I get a lot of it's a very controversial thing. I'm in a unique space in the sense of I work for these authors. I
Mhm.
have 2 shelves behind me that are filled with books that were sent to me for free from authors, and I am
Oh, wow.
so incredibly fortunate for that. But I also when someone sends me their book, I don't say, "Oh, thank you so much. Plug and play." I say, "Thank you so much. How can I get this author some money back?" So I do my book unboxings to make sure that, between Threads, Instagram, and TikTok, today we have over 23,000 followers. So how can I get this book in front of other people to where maybe someone else will go buy it? That's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is I immediately go to Amazon or the Zon to see if it is available for KU or Kindle purchase. If it's on KU, I read it on KU. If it's available for Kindle purchase, I purchase it from the Kindle. And that's how I read the book, to where I can give something back to the author that I otherwise really couldn't do it, because if I was to send even $5 to every author that sent me a book, I would be living with one of you guys because I just couldn't afford it. So that's how I try to give back. But I read and listen at such a high rate that I'm at 224 books of the year, and that
Holy
is
smokes.
not it's not sustainable for
Mm.
the average, reader. And last year, I think I finished 86 books, but I was also working full time and reading regular books. So I think that's a little bit more on the realistic side, but you're right, because it's this FOMO, this fear of missing out, it's this competition that is really completely unnecessary. It is this, well, I need to read more. I need to read 100 books. But why? Because I'm to the point where I'm struggling, where I'm reading books so fast that I can't even really sit with them like I want to. And it's becoming more of a like, okay, I think I might need to take a break from reading for a little bit, or slow it down and only finish 1 book a day versus 3 books a day. But like I said, for that 6 month period, I was fortunate because I didn't have to report to a 9 to 5 every single day. I had a lot of downtime. So, of course, I'm going to read and do what I enjoy. But the pressure to put on yourself to read triple digits is absolutely insane. If you have the ability to do that and truly soak it up and enjoy it and have a space, a library where you can sit down and really genuinely soak it in, that's great. But what's going to happen next year when you're trying to break that and now it's just a job? I don't want reading to ever become a job. And it should
Yeah.
never be a job. So I completely agree with that. When people look at my numbers, they're like, oh, you really can't be reading them. No, I am reading them, I'm listening to them, thankfully, and I can tell you what the stories are about, and I leave my reviews, but unfortunately, I don't get to live with them as long as I would like to live with them, like other people do with their books, if that makes any sense at all.
And listening is reading. You're getting the same story. I mean, there are some differences from physical to audio, but you're still getting the story.
Yeah, that was also a very controversial conversation because beforehand, I'm 100% guilty where I would, people would say, "Oh, I read that book." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." Yeah, I listened to it. I'm like, "Then you didn't read it because you don't read music when you're in the car and you're listening to it. You listen to it."
Right.
And, someone broke it down for me and I'm so thankful because I'm always open. Like, you're welcome to educate me on anything. I'm always open to that. But they said, so would you tell a blind person that's listening to a book that they didn't read it because they didn't use their eyes that they physically can't use? And I was like, well, no, I wouldn't. And they're like, then why are you doing that to other people? And I'm like, you know what? You're right. We consumed it regardless. Like, we have the knowledge of the words. So why does it matter? I agree now. They've converted me to, if you listen to it, it's still considered reading. So I'm on that board now, but
Yeah, I think it's still important to do both, but yeah, I sometimes here, for example, you look at horror, uh, The Exorcist. I think William Peter Blatty did such a phenomenal job narrating his own book for the
hmm,
audiobook that it's one of the few books that I recommend listening to over physically reading. The man tells the story the way it was meant to be
yeah,
read or heard, and I always recommend that one as a listen. And some other narrators they're fantastic, and
yeah,
I still have some really great pleasurable reads, but and this I brought up with someone else. So print, on page, when you have a
yeah,
story that's in print, that is an unfixed medium. Audio and visual, it's going to be a little bit more fixed. Visual more so, movies more so
yeah,
than text. But the way that you read a book and the way that you interpret the story is going to be different than the way that I do it. And
right.
you and I can read the same book and have a different understanding of it, a different perception of the characters, a different appearance of the characters, a different perception of the environment. It's all going to be a little bit different for each one of us. And when you move to audio or when you move to film, and it becomes more and more fixed, that's going to change a little bit, right? Because how the narrator presents an accent, or how the narrator reads dialogue, or how on screen a person is dressed, or a set is designed, or whatever it is,
Mm,
that's all going to make our experience more and more shared. It's going to be the same experience, but
right.
that's I think where the experience of a physical book uh is just so valuable and distinct
Yeah,
from the other editions.
yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I don't think a lot of people think of it like that. They don't break it down to that capacity. But yeah, when you're reading in black and white, your imagination runs wild. You can have purple hair unless it's described otherwise.
Right.
You make up the visual effects. And then audio, yes, goes a little bit differently because it's not so black and white. And then obviously with the visual effects, yeah, we all saw this guy's brunette, right? We all see that he has muscles. We all see that this girl's petite and blonde and slender. There's no imagination with that when it's right there in front of you. So I think that's absolutely correct in that. But yeah, I mean, do you have any questions for me outside of the questions that you've asked for the readers and the advice that you've given to the readers?
No, ma'am, I think we've touched on anything that comes to mind immediately anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited to hear about your second book. I definitely want to thank you so very much for coming on here with us and talking to us about your book and then your new book that's going to be coming out and everything in between. And for those of you guys that are definitely into that horror genre, you know what to do, you know where to go. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. And Chris, thank you so much for being here with us today. I sincerely appreciate you. And for everybody else, make sure you guys tune in next time and drop it in the comments if you want to talk about this novel.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.